Two ways we can do this. I have got a very long, boring presentation because I thought we might have a crowd, or we can just have a conversation. Votes for the presentation, votes for the conversation. We'll do both. I'll zip through it and we'll have a chat. So, hello, good afternoon, thanks for all coming. My name's Paul Smith. So, I've been with British Skydiving since July, and I'm the newly appointed head of safeguarding and compliance. So, the reason it's called a look behind the curtain is I have a very different approach to the word compliance that most compliance officers have. Most compliance officers are, we're secret, we don't tell you what we're doing, and suddenly we pounce on you and suddenly you're in a disciplinary. I'm the other way around. I'm very open, I'm very transparent. I want you to know what I'm doing, because one of the points I'll make here is that you are all members of British Skydiving. You pay your affiliation fees, your membership fees. That pays my wages. I work for you guys. I report to Rob and the Chief Executive Board, but ultimately I work for you guys as our members. So that's where I want to start off. So who am I? Ultimately, like I said, I work with you. Head of Safeguard Compliance. The last 12 years or so, I've worked with different governing bodies in the same role. So I was 10 years with England Hockey, 3 years with England Boxing. The words boxing and safeguarding don't really go together, if you think about it. So that was quite a challenging job. So when the skydiving job came along, I thought, I'll go and do that. Well, that's people throwing themselves out of planes and safeguarding. That doesn't really fit either. So we'll try and sort of work our way around that. And before I started in the sports arena, I've got 30-odd years of working with various regulatory bodies in enforcement. So I worked for the Gambling Commission. I was head of risk there. I worked for the Gangmasters Licensing Authority, which was set up after the Cockleshell disaster. I was head of enforcement there. So I've got a long career history in compliance. Safeguarding, not so much. Safeguarding, I've only started in the past 8 years or so, because that's a sort of a new arena that's taken off, and we'll cover that in a moment as well. So, as I said, I work for you guys. You pay your membership fees, they pay my salaries, I work for you. And I'm very, 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 I cannot stress this enough, very keen to go out and speak to the drop zones, the jumpers, and sort of learn, because I'm on a very steep learning curve. I'm not a skydiver. Don't understand the willingness to throw yourself out of an aeroplane, but that's down to you. So I'm on a very steep learning curve to learn about the industry. So that's one of the reasons I want to talk to you. I also want to understand the challenges you guys face, because it's no good me sitting in an office in Leicester writing policies and procedures that don't work for you guys. So I'm very keen to have that two-way conversation. So what's my role? To make sure you don't fall foul of UK legislation. So one of the big topics for discussion yesterday at the Drop Zone Owners Lunch was the subject of HSE legislation and what the role HSE have. So at the moment, I'm in a battle with HSE over, that's your remit, this is our remit, don't tread on our toes, and vice versa. So that's one of the things I'm doing. To ensure our members are protected. Protected from what? Protected from ourselves. So there's a new, don't know if you've seen it, new code of conduct that's been written, which talks about how we behave towards each other. There used to be a code of practice for instructors and coaches, but it didn't apply to everybody else. And my first job when I came was, well, we haven't got a code of conduct for our members, so how are we going to interact with each other? It's all a nice, sensible things about, showing respect and treating each other equally, etc., etc. Where necessary, when complaints do come in, it's my job to investigate them. So they'll be referred to me. So say, for example, we have a safeguarding complaint comes in, gets referred to me. I then make decisions on whether we're going to involve police, social services, etc. Or if it's a low-level issue, we might just deal with it locally. Something I mentioned earlier on, to develop and share best practice. The world of safeguarding operates on best practice. So what we do is we find things that are working well in one place, and we share that information in another place. What I've noticed is that skydiving is a village. Everybody knows everybody else. And whilst there are drop zones, are businesses that are operating commercially against each other, they're very keen to share ideas and best practice to make sure people are safe, which is a real positive thing. And the last one's a bit of a cheesy line, but it's to make you as good as you can be. So I want all of the drop zones to operate in the best fashion possible. So one of my roles is education. So my approach to compliance, I call it the 3 E's. You educate someone, so you tell them the rules they should be operating to. You empower them to do that, so you give them the tools necessary. And if they don't do that, then you enforce it. I'm really keen on the first two. I don't like doing the last one. Because ultimately what you're doing is you're punishing someone for not doing something they should have done. Can't do that. They don't know what it is. So I'm really keen on the education bit. So my role for the next couple of years, excuse me, is going to be educating people on what rules and regs they should be operating on. And then somewhere further down the line, if they're not doing it after we've told them to do it and educated them to do it, we might have to start kicking a few backsides. But hopefully that's a long way down the line. Monty Python fans amongst you might recognise the top line, what the Romans ever done for us, from the life of Brian. So what have British Skydiving ever done for its membership? So, as I say, I've been here 7 months. Rob, our chief exec, has tasked me with doing several things. These are them. So better engagement between parachute training organisations and British Skydiving. So that's my conversation to have with you guys. No good me writing a policy and a procedure that doesn't work in the real world. And already I've run a few past people that I've met in drop zones and said, this is what I'm thinking, does it work for you? And they've come back and said, Paul, no, because X, Y, Z. And if those X, Y, Z make sense, we change the policy and procedure to make sure it still follows the legislation, but it's workable on the ground. And that's what I'm very keen to find. I've mentioned that drop zones are all businesses. I need to understand the business needs. What are the needs of those businesses? And again, it's no good saying, here's a piece of legislation that you should operate under. And they go, well, that'll bankrupt me if I do that. Okay, well, let's find a way to stay within the legislation, but let's find it workable and practical for you guys. That happened in a previous job, actually, way back, where a piece of legislation came in. It would have decimated the industry I was working in at the time. So we sort of had a lot of forum meetings with the business operators, and we went back to the legislators. I went to the House of Commons, actually, and sat down with the MPs and said, this is going to decimate us because, and then they listened, we got it adapted, basically. So it is possible. And all of these things are done within the legislation guidance that's available to us. So, safeguarding. Hands up, safeguarding leads. Anybody a safeguarding lead? 1, 2. Have you had any safeguarding training? Anything delivered by British Skydiving? One of the things, yeah, big shakes of the head. One of the things I was surprised at when I joined British Skydiving was I was told each of the drop zones got a safeguarding lead. Fantastic. Any of them had any training? No. Well, what's the point of having a safeguarding lead if you haven't had any training? So I imagine the situation is all piano players one step forward. Great, you're the new safeguarding lead. And I imagine that's occurred quite a lot within the drop zones. Safeguarding, I would say it's the most important job to have on a drop zone. Bearing in mind what you're doing, throwing people out of airplanes and making sure they're all safe, etc. Safeguarding falls under that. Now, I want to make a very clear distinction. My job is nothing to do with the ops manual. So when I'm talking about compliance, I'm not talking about compliance with the operations manual. That's the job of the safety team. So if there's, and that's why they do their audits. So if there's issues at a drop zone with regards to the operations manual, that's down for them. And I've had a few complaints come to me that says, this is happening at my drop zone and it's not in accordance with the ops manual. Bosh, straight over to those guys, they're on it like a rash. My job is more about the softer side of the sport. My job is about caring for people, making sure people are safe on the ground, making sure interactions with people are positive, making sure experience is good. And I'll talk about safeguarding a bit more in depth in a moment. The other bit of feedback I got from some of the drop zones I spoke to was, it's all very well and good, Paul, you saying we should have a safeguarding policy, but no one's ever told us what a safeguarding policy looks like. No one's told us what a safeguarding policy should have in it. We've been left to our own devices. So we've gone away and Googled it a bit, and we've written our own safeguarding policy, and here it is, and now you're here telling us it's not worth the paper it's written on. That's happened a few times. So what I've done is, in conjunction with some of the big safeguarding policies, the NSPCC and the Ancraft Trust, anyone familiar with the Ancraft Trust? Ancraft Trust does what the NSPCC does for adults. So they're safeguarding adults, particularly adults with learning disabilities, etc. So I've worked with those, and I have drafted safeguarding policies and procedures for drop zones. And these are the things I've run past people to say, is that going to work at your drop zone? So they're going to be available. Reporting mechanisms. The old way of reporting an incident, I say a non-skydiving incident, that's the ops manual side of things, but a safeguarding issue or another compliance issue, here's a very long form you have to fill out, then you have to email it in, then you have to get an acknowledgement, blah, 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 blah. That takes weeks and weeks and weeks. I've simplified that, and I'll come back onto that in a moment. One thing I'm very aware of, for the safeguarding lead in the room, you've probably got other jobs within the drop zone as well. So I appreciate that this can be a pain in the backside sometimes and a bit onerous. So what I'm trying to do is remove that burden from you guys as much as possible. First point of contact, me, and training. I'll come on to that in a minute. So there's going to be training available for those of you involved in safeguarding. And again, that's all going to be through the wonderful website that we've just built. No comments, please, about the website or Skyvault. That's not my job. I'm just using that as a tool to get information out there. So this is a snapshot of one of the web pages. So new guidance documents. So this is information that is going to be available to you. All of these are links through to PDF documents. So you can say, for example, we've got an issue at our drop zone about young people sharing changing rooms with adults. Changing room guidance. Click on that. That will give you the latest information with regards to what's the policy on changing rooms. Appropriate communication. That's not just how you talk to people. That's your social media policy, what you can and cannot put on social media, how you interact with young people over social media. Should a coach have a 16-year-old's telephone number in his phone so we can have a chat with them at 3 o'clock in the morning? Probably not. It's not a good idea. All of that stuff's in there. Guidance for taking and using photographs and recorded images. Now, obviously, I'm aware that a lot of drop zones have camera operators during jumps, but it's also about if you're having an event at your drop zone and you've got young people present, should you be taking their photographs and sticking it all over social media without their parents' permission? That's what that is. Guidance on concern of abuse outside of skydiving. So if you've got a skydiver comes to you and tells them, you know, there's a domestic issue at home, for example, what do you do about that? Physical contact with young people. Skydiving is a very hands-on sport. If you've got a 16 or a 17-year-old and you're going to put their kit on for them, that's physical contact. So guidance on what we do with that. Positions of trust guidance. A position of trust issue is if you've got an instructor or a coach. Let's say I'm an instructor and I'm working with a young person. I avoid using the word children because we've only got 16 and 17-year-olds in our sport, so I use the word young person. So if I'm coaching a 16-year-old and I develop a relationship with that 16-year-old, legal, above the age of consent, but it's a position of trust issue, okay? That is a criminal offence. There's a new law around that. So that's what that is. Transporting young people. So how do you ship them from your drop zone to another drop zone to take part in a competition? Appropriate people in the car, etc., etc. Bullying guidance, same thing. And a new thing, welfare officers at events. So if you're having an event at your drop zone, there should be a nominated person to be the welfare officer. So if an issue arises, you're the first person they go to. Then you ring me. Okay, so these are all the sort of things. And what I'm keen for you guys is to say, other stuff we want. So whatever you want, in terms of we need guidance about X, Y, Z, I'll go away and research it. I'll speak to the appropriate bodies. We'll get some guidance on the website. So all of these things are there for you to say, well, we can use these to inform the development of our own safeguarding policy if we wanted to. So I'm trying to make it as easy as possible, basically. I spoke about draft policies and procedures. This is the front page of the safeguarding procedures. And it really is, as you can see in the green bits, insert name of your organisation, delete this bit, put that bit in, blah, 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 blah. And all the way through the document, there'll be little green bits where you just put Beckles or Langer or whoever it is, and you can tweak it however you want. Again, I'm not saying this is compulsory. I'm not saying this is the policy it should have. I'm saying here's a draft one that you can use and tweak to your own standards if you wanted to. Again, trying to make the job easier for you. Scan that. Got your phone? Have a look at that. And Kelly will tell me if it works. Does it work, Kelly? Right, this is the new reporting mechanism I spoke about. So, this is going to be on the website. I'm going to get this put on A3 posters, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. All of that will be shipped out to you. Anyone who wishes to report any concern whatsoever, whether it be safeguarding or a compliance concern, again, not the ops manual, but anything else. If you've got that QR code on your drop zone somewhere, they can scan that. And it's a very simple, this is what happened, this is what I've done about it, and this is who I am. They're the 3 questions. That will then go straight into the database we've got. It automatically pings an email to me, and then I phone that person, and I get all the details. What I'm asking drop zones to do is report everything. Because at the moment, I don't have an understanding of where we are in terms of what the problems are at drop zones. So I know for a fact, I've got one case on my desk at the moment that happened at a drop zone and wasn't reported. And it came to me through the police. So I'm dealing with that at the moment. What I'm asking is everything, and I mean everything. You know, kid falls over their shoelace, which was, whatever it is, I want it on here. And then where I can do with this information is I can then start monitoring the trends. So I can see we've got 43 cases of this. This is obviously happening at the drop zones. They need some help about this. So I can then develop some help about that. Does that make sense? I'm also going to use this as a triage system. So everything comes into me. I have a look at it. Some of it might be really low-level stuff. I'll give you guys a ring and say, we've had this come in. You can deal with it yourselves. Here's some help and guidance, but I'm on the end of a phone if you need me. Bosh. Otherwise, it's, I ring you guys. We've had this come in. I've spoken to the person concerned. It's a medium or high-level risk. I'm going to deal with it, but I'll keep you informed as to progress. Bosh. Removing that burden from you guys. Because I've heard stories of things that have gone on in the past that safeguarding leads have had, and suddenly they've gone, shit, I don't know what to do with this. And there's been nobody that they can pick the phone up to and say, I've got this problem. 9 times out of 10, they've just rung the local council, said, can I speak to social services? Which is fine, but there's a process to follow. Anybody know what a LADO is? L-A-D-O. A local authority designated officer. Every local authority in the country has a LADO who deals with safeguarding concerns for children, okay? So everybody, so if you did have an issue, and let's say you can't get through to me, or I'm on holiday, or whatever, I am allowed holiday now and then, you can ring your local council, can I speak to the LADO please, put you straight through, and they will give you the same advice that I'm going to give you. And they may say, okay, well that's a serious issue, you refer it to us, or we'll ring the police, etc., etc. So one of the things I will do on the website is I will list every LADO in the country. So if you're in Nottinghamshire, bosh, there are, there's their contact details. If you're in Lincolnshire, bosh, wherever you are, okay? But when I say I list them all for every, I will list them appropriate to where you are. It's no me putting the LADO for the Isle of Man on if you haven't got a drop zone in the Isle of Man on. So that's going to make life a lot easier for you, hopefully. Training. On the new website, on Skyvault, there's going to be what we call the LMS, the Learning Management System. So a lot of the ops guys are going to be putting on training videos with regards to how you do this, that, and the other. I'm going to use the same portal for putting safeguarding training on. Different national governing bodies have different approaches to safeguarding training. Where I was at England Hockey and Boxing, they say you need a UK sport coach qualification. Now our sport is very different to lots of others. So when I was at hockey, 80% of the membership was under the age of 16. They're all kids playing at clubs and things. So every coach was mandated to have, you must have the UK sport qualification. We've got 16 and 17-year-olds. We haven't got that many of them. We're taking a slightly different approach to say, we'll do our own training, but if you want to do the other training, here's the links to it. Now, the other training has got costs associated to it. So I think the NSPCC Introductory to Safeguarding Training Online course is 30 quid. Now, again, trying to make life easier, I know what drop zone owners are like. 30 quid, I'm not spending 30 quid. So what I've done is this is the first page to a PowerPoint presentation that has got me talking over the top of it. So it lasts 27 minutes. But it's an introduction and the key points to safeguarding. So all of those of you with an interest in safeguarding can do this via the website for free. It doesn't give you a formal qualification, but it gives you the knowledge you need for a day-to-day basis. That makes sense? If you want to do the qualifications, please do. I'll deny I ever said this, I know it's being recorded, but if you want to do the formal ones and you came to me and said the drop zone won't pay for this and I can't afford it, I'll see what I can do about finding some funding from somewhere. There are pots of funding through Sport England and very other bodies that are about safeguarding. I know where they are, I can access them. So if you came to me and said, any chance British Skydiving can pay for this, we'll try. Not promising, but we'll try. That's the safeguarding side of things. Compliance, I keep getting asked the question, I've been asked it today, compliance with what? What you're going to tell us to comply with? Well, there's the ops manual we've already spoken about on the other side of the fence. But this stuff, UK legislation. So anybody aware recently that suddenly we've asked for DBS checks? Yep, a few nodding heads. I'll talk about that in a minute. Code of conduct, I've mentioned, policies, and ID&E legislation, or ED&I, I used to, doesn't matter which way, inclusion, diversity and equality legislation. This is becoming a minefield. So again, this is one of the areas that we will be pushing out lots of information to say, you need to be aware of X, Y, and Z. It's just a photographer, everybody smile. So again, that's something we'll be looking at. It says up there, Moscow. Anybody from a project management background? No, good, because I might get this wrong. So Moscow is something used in the project management world, and it stands for things you must have, things you should have, things you could have, and things it would be nice to have, but we're not really fussed about it. So that's my approach to compliance. There are things in the world of compliance that you must have. So you must have, you must adhere to the ops manual. Things you should adhere to. So you should adhere to the code of practice. Things you could have, which are, the nice pink and fluffy stuff, and that would be nice too. So my focus is around the first two bits. Somewhere down the line, when you've got the first two bits right, and you are exemplars of, best practice, we'll start looking at the pink and fluffy bits to make you as good as you can be. So this is where the guidance and advice comes in. Best practice dissemination, we've talked about that already. Sense checks, does it work for you guys? And what happens if you don't comply? Now, this is world of pain, not just for you, but for me as well. Because if you're not complying with UK legislation, then it'll be another department that comes in and tramples all over you, HSE being a good example. And then it's my job to work with them to say, well, actually, you can't do this, you can't do that. So a good compliance officer works himself or herself out of a job eventually, because my job is to make sure you're all brilliant and this doesn't happen. So ultimately, I should be sat in Leicester going, well, I've got nothing to do because they're all fantastic. That's the role of a good compliance officer. I was asked today, new code of conduct, what happens if someone breaches the code of conduct? Well, the procedures are in the code of conduct, so if you'd read the second bit of him, you would know. But it's how do we go about dealing with disciplinary issues and setting up disciplinary panels, what are the consequences, do we start then removing membership, etc., etc. It's all that sort of stuff, okay? Fortunately, we're not there yet. I've not had anything come across my desk where I think, well, that's out, that's someone who's out the organisation, or that someone we've got to suspend their membership until such time as we investigate it. So touch wood, we don't get many of those. Boxing, I used to get 3 a week of those. You can imagine, 2:30 in the morning, someone's come outside the pub. I used to have more phone calls with police officers than anybody else. Oh, I've got one of your members here. Is it somebody? Well, it's a surprise. He's a boxer. So we used to get loads of those. But fortunately, in 7 months, we've not had any. Please keep it that way. Audits. I've mentioned audits. The safety and training officers do audits of drop zones, and I've been out with them a couple of times. Where have I been? Hibbleslow, Langer, Tilstock. They're the 3 I've been to at the moment. And the one thing I've learned is that I didn't have to go to any of them. I can do audits sat in Leicester. So all I'm going to be doing is, can you send me your safeguarding policies, please? Here's the email. I'll go through them. Here's some feedback. We'll do it that way. So I really want to do this. Minimal disruption of your business. I've been out to the drop zones with these guys, and I've met people, and that's been useful to make those connections. But to sit down and go through their policies and go, yeah, they're fine. Why have I just driven 3 hours to do that? When you just ping it in, I'll do it at my desk. If you want me to come and talk to you about things, more than happy to. But I'm not going to be knocking on your door. There's no bosh, here we go, through the door, let's do an audit. I've caught you out not doing this. That's not my style. I'm more working with you, as I keep saying. And when I do an audit, you'll always have that. And unless you're really, really messed up, that will always be constructive from me. That'll always be, you've done this, that's really great. It could be better if you did this, that, and the other. Yeah, rather than big stick. Like I say, educate, enable, the big stick's further down the line. If you don't do it after the 3rd time, then the big stick comes out. Okay. DBS, I mentioned DBS. DBS is something that used to be called CRB, Criminal Records Bureau, Disclosure and Barring Service, it stands for now. And there's legislation that says if you're working with children in a regulated activity, you have to have a DBS. So basically, your employer needs to check your criminal history to see if you've got a conviction that is relevant to the work you're doing. Now, for years, my understanding is skydiving has always said, we are not regulated activity. Well, you are, if you're doing certain things. That's the legislation, the Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act of 2006. That was brought in around about that time because there were some horrendous instances of people on the sex offenders register working with kids. So they brought that legislation in. Schedule 4.1.1, this is the world I work in, it's really riveting, isn't it? An activity is a regulated activity related to children if it is mentioned in paragraph 2, brackets 1. Paragraph 2, brackets 1. The activities referred to in that are any form of teaching, training, or instruction of children. So if you're an instructor and you're jumping a tandem with a 16-year-old, you're teaching and instructing that 16-year-old. So you're caught by the legend. So that is regulated activity. If you're a coach and working with a 16 or 17-year-old, regulated activity. This is the bit. Unless the teaching, training, or instruction is merely incidental to teaching, training, or instruction of persons who are not children. So the example I always give there is you're running a yoga class for adults. 3 of them have brought their kids with them, and they're sat in the corner over there playing with Lego. You're teaching the adults, but you're also teaching them because they're listening and learning. Primarily, your audience is adults. That is incidental. Make sense? In our situation, you're jumping out of an aeroplane strapped to a 16-year-old. That's not incidental. That's teaching, training, etc., etc. So it's caught under the legislation. And the penalty is, if you engage with those people, if you employ someone who you know to be on one of the barred lists, and I'll talk about those in a minute, it is an offence. So the employer is the person at risk. And when I say employer, that doesn't mean that the instructor's on your PAYE payroll. It means any remuneration. So if they're self-employed, if they're one of your instructors and you pay them by way of every hour you do, you get a free jump ticket, or whatever it is, you are the employer. So you are caught by that. And we had it in hockey. We had a hockey club that employed somebody, the DBS came back. They thought, well, he's a good egg, really. They didn't see he was on the sex offenders register. They employed him as a coach, and they got prosecuted. And it is quite hefty in terms of sentencing. There are different types of check you can do with the DBS. So as an employer, any employer can do a basic check on an employee. Okay? Now, the Freedom of Information Act covers all of this. You can only apply to know this stuff if the person's doing certain things. So a basic check, unspent convictions and conditional cautions. A standard check, unspent and spent convictions and adult cautions from the PNC, which have not been filtered in line with UK legislation. So this basically shows up any conviction or caution or the PNC, the Police National Computer, they filter out certain things. So if you said, I've got this person, he wants to be a coach, he's going to be working with under 16s, if there was a conviction or caution that was on there that isn't relevant, they wouldn't show it. Makes sense? If they got done for shoplifting when they were 14, they wouldn't show that. Makes sense. If it was a domestic violence conviction, they would show that one. An enhanced check shows the same as a standard check, plus any information held by local police that's considered relevant to the role. This one is the civil liberties. People are up in arms about this one, because this shows you all the police intelligence. So they needn't have been convicted, but if the police say, Paul Smith was arrested on suspicion of paedophilia, but Paul Smith went to court and was acquitted, that gets shown on there, because it casts doubt upon the nature of the person. An enhanced check with a check of the barred lists. Now, the barred lists are what they say they are. They are lists of people who are barred from working with children or vulnerable adults. And that's because they've got convictions that relate to children or vulnerable adults. So that's the sex offenders register. Okay, so if you're on that and you're still employed as a coach or instructor, that's where the penalties come in for employers. So which check do you get? Well, since we brought this in, that's the one question I get asked more than any. Paul, I got this instructor, and sometimes he jumps with 16-year-olds, but he's only done it twice, so we don't think he needs a DBS check. Wrong, he does. Okay, so which one does he need? Well, I think these two, and I'll come to them in a minute. It's the one thing people get wrong. So we've implemented an online system. We're working with a company called First Advantage. All the safeguarding leads have access to it, so they're starting to do DBS checks. I get to see all those DBS checks they're applying for, and I go, every day I go, that one's wrong. You've applied for the wrong bloody form. Change it and do it back again. I will say, and this is very important, that when you apply for a DBS check, the information comes back. You don't get to see what they've been convicted of if they've got convictions and cautions. So you will either get, you've applied for a DBS on Paul Smith, everything's fine. Or you've applied for a DBS for Paul Smith, there are concerns. And then it's down to you, like me more likely, to speak to Paul Smith and say, your DBS has come back with something on it. Can you show me a copy of your DBS certificate? Because when you apply for a DBS, the certificate goes to the person who you're applying for. Again, freedom of information and all that sort of stuff. So if Paul Smith says, yeah, I've got mine here, I got done for shoplifting, there you go, that's fine. If Paul Smith goes, I don't want to show you this, that's also fine, but you're no longer an instructor or a coach. Or you're no longer an instructor or a coach who will work with young people or vulnerable adults. They can still be instructors and coaches and work with just adults, but that's a business decision for you to take. So, what does a spent or an unspent conviction mean? That's another question I get. Paul, this has come back, he's got unspent conviction. How do I know what a spent and conviction? Again, all this information will be supplied. If you've got a sentence of over 4 years, it's never spent. it stays on your record forever. If it's more than 30 months and less than 4 years, it's the length of your sentence plus 7 years it stays on your record. And you can read all those yourself. As it lessens and lessens, it's on the record. So let's say that Paul Smith's got a conviction of, used to get him in boxing all the time, I'll use one of the boxing ones, GBH. So Paul Smith's got a conviction of GBH. Paul Smith wants to be a coach, teaching kids how to box. And he applies for his coach certificate, and we did a DBS on him, and it comes back to say, Paul Smith's got issues. Paul Smith goes, oh yeah, I've got GBH. How long? Oh, it was ages ago. How long was it? How long did you get? Oh, I got 2 years suspended. So 2 years suspended would fall into that one. So 2 years suspended plus 7, so it's valid for 9 years. Oh, but it was ages ago, so it doesn't really matter. No, you're not being a coach because it's an unspent conviction. And you got it for hitting somebody, and you want to coach kids on how to hit people. You're not suitable to be a coach. Off you go. So that's why that's appropriate. And then for youths, slightly different. Now, the key point here, it's how old were they at the date of the offence? So you might have someone come to you in their 30s and say, oh, well, I've got this, but it was when I was 17. That switches on, because they were a youth at the time they committed the offence. The fact that they're now an adult is neither here nor there. Makes sense? And again, all of this will be on the website. And this is my flowchart. I love a flowchart. What else? Sorry, yes, go on.
You included on this Disclosure Scotland for Scottish drop zones.
I knew there'd be a Scottish person or a Northern Irish person in here. That would really mess this up. The rules in Scotland and Northern Ireland are different. We'll have a chat afterwards. I'll take your details and I will send you the stuff about Disclosure Scotland, because it is slightly different in Scotland and Northern Ireland. But yes, on the website, I'll have both, because we do have 2 sites in Scotland,
yeah.
Strathallan and St Andrews, and 1 in Northern Ireland. Is that right? We have a drop zone. Yes, we have a drop zone in Northern Ireland. So yeah, I'll put that information on the drop zone as well. I'll make sure that's there. This is the flowchart that says who gets what, because all of that information has just gone in one ear and out the other, and it's all a bit heavy. I'm a visual learner, so I love these. I'll put this on.
And all this is now becoming mandatory.
DBS is because it's legislation. When we rolled it out, we did get a bit of pushback about, well, we've never done this before, so why are we doing it now? It's because it's legislation. It's something we should have been doing since 2006. Yeah. And there was a bit of pushback because 2 reasons. One, skydiving was considered to be not within the regulated activity. And secondly was, we don't deal with kids. Well, technically we do. We deal with young people, 16s and 17s. That was my next point. So I went to an event at Langer when I first started, which was great. Canopy formation, I think it was, championships. I was amazed how many kids were running around. And of course, they're family members. So there was a lot of charity jumpers there as well. So they were there, they brought their families, and it was just awash with kids running around, which was great. But it suddenly occurred to me that the policies and procedures we've got should also say, well, if you've got kids running around your site, you need to be careful what happens with them as well, which is why we need welfare officers on site. This is the, as I say, the flow chart that explains who gets what. And this, again, will be on the website. So if you've got somebody who joins your team, or you think, oh, Fred needs a DBS check, which one do I get him? That one explains it. The bit in the middle is the tricky bit. So is this a role working with under 18s or vulnerable adults for 4 or more days in a 30-day period? So in a month, how many jumps are you doing tied to a 16 or 17-year-old? Yes or no? That's not the same 16 or 17-year-old. So 4 days a month, you might jump with 4 different 16, 17-year-olds. That's a yes. It's not the same one. Okay. That's it. Wasn't that fun? Thank you. We've got time. Questions? I know it's, yeah, I thought the hands might go up. Lady over there.
How often do we have to go back and do a DBS check? Because they're only valid really for the day that you've done them, right? Because you
Yes.
So how often do we have to recap that?
That's a very good question. Just for the recording, the question was, how often do we have to recap DBS checks? It's a common misnomer that DBS checks have a expiry date on them. They don't. And your point's very valid. You could do a DBS check on me today, and you could say, great, Paul Smith's got nothing wrong with him. On the way home, something could happen, and suddenly I've got a conviction. Best practice is you check every 3 years. Again, that's not mandatory, that's best practice. A lot of national governing bodies insist on checks every 3 years, so we're just saying that that's good practice. Okay?
Can you get back on the slide?
Sure.
So where it says, is the role supervised?
Yeah.
What supervision, what
Yeah.
do they have?
So, again, if we go back to my previous roles with other organisations, so I'm a hockey coach. So I coach kids hockey. The supervision question comes down to, do I run those sessions on my own, or is there a senior coach overlooking what I'm doing? So if you're doing a ground school, for example, with a 16 or 17-year-old, and you're being overseen by somebody else, that's a supervised role. So that covers that. However, as soon as you take that person up in an aeroplane, I would argue that the distance from the aeroplane to the ground, you're not being supervised at all. And that is when you're in close contact with that individual, and that's where most incidents are going to occur between there and there. So I would argue that's an unsupervised role for that bit. The ground school could be, but that bit isn't. Does that make sense?
A supervisor would be somebody who has done the enhanced DBS advisement.
Not necessarily. Because the supervisor is supervising you. They're not working directly with the young people. That makes sense? Yeah. So technically, your supervisor might only have a basic because they don't work with children. They're just your supervisor. You're the one who is, excuse the phrase, hands-on with the young people. You're the person who needs the DBS check. But that person is supervising you. Basically, are you left alone on, is what I'm talking about. Is there another adult in the room to witness what's going on? That's what supervision comes down to. Any more? Yes.
So this only applies at the moment to instructors and coaches.
Yes.
There's been incidents in the past, and I'm not going to mention any names or locations, where members of staff have been found with, say, child porn on their computers or CSA material in their caravan or something like that. They weren't instructors or coaches, but however they were employees of the drop zone.
Yeah.
So for instance, a camera fire or something like that, or a receptionist or a pilot, for example. We're not doing DBS yet for that.
Again, as an employer, you can do a DBS check on anybody. The basic check that I referred to.
There's a little bit of a cult of secrecy within the sport.
Yeah, I know.
We won't tell anyone. We'll put, and so then the discretion lies with
This
friends with that person.
You're right, and this is the thing I was alluding to earlier about matters unreported. So it's my job over the next 12 months or so to get round to the drop zones and speak to people and say, look, this stuff, it needs to be referred in because we need to not clean up our act, but we need to make sure that everybody, not just young people, but everybody is working towards, being as good as we can be. And that's where I need to build up that level of trust to say, you can report it to me and I will deal with it. I will not go from, let's pick one I've been to, I will not go from Tilstock to Langer and go, you never guess what I saw at Tilstock. Because that's me fired for a start. Breach of confidentiality. So I need to build up that level of trust between drop zones and British Skydiving and me as that representative to say, you can report stuff to me and it will be dealt with. The only people that will know you've reported to me is the chief exec. He's the only other person who's got access to that system. And he doesn't know how to use it at the moment, which is great because that means I'm the only person that can use it. And that will stay confidential. It might be a case of, for example, you've got material in your caravan that's not suitable. Now, the question arises, as long as a young person doesn't go in that caravan, does it matter? It becomes a moral judgment then. I would argue that it does, because it has the potential for a young person to go in there and see that material, or anybody could be offended by that sort of material. So I would argue it does. But it's an area we need to look at, and we need to look at the sort of the moral and the ethical side. Where I am at the moment is legislation side. Let's get the legislation side sorted first, and then we'll start looking at the moral and ethical stuff. Any more? Gentleman at the back.
The guidance notes.
Yeah.
If on Monday the website isn't playing, is there any other way you can get hold of those?
Yeah, you can contact me. My email address, I'll give you my email address. I've got 3. There's safeguarding app, there's compliance app. The best way is paul@britishskydiving.org. That's straight to me. I've got access to the other 2. Or the other thing you can write, I'll give you my direct telephone number. It's 077 89 11 7035. That is my telephone number. It's not a British Skydiving telephone number, because my British Skydiving phone still doesn't work after 7 months, Kelly. So I'm using my number. I don't mind you having that, but and if there is an issue at 2 o'clock in the morning, ring it. Don't be worried about, oh, it's Paul's private number. My wife's used to be getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning to do stuff. So yeah, contact me then. If it's not up on Monday, well, let's say Tuesday. We've all been given the Monday off because of the stress of the expo. But we'll be in the office Tuesday. So if there's any questions coming out today that haven't been answered today, by all means get in touch and say, I came to your talk, my name is blah, 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 blah. It's something I'm very aware of, that in my role I need to be accessible 24/7, and I'm quite happy to do that. So if you have got anything that pops up, just give me a ring and say, we've got this. That stuff, for example. Give me a ring and say, we've got this on our drop zone. What can we do about it? And I'll be in the car and on my way. Da, da, da. Any more for any more? Yes, sir.
Sorry, I think you've already answered this, but I'm still a little bit confused. Earlier you talked about the legislation, and that anybody who works with children comes under the legislation. But then you're saying, at the moment, the only people who need DBS checks is instructors and coaches. So, just for an example,
yeah.
I'm a parachute rigger.
Okay.
I might run a packing course at the drop zone on my own. And there could be under 18s there.
Well, in that case, yeah, you would fall under the legislation if you're teaching. And that's a very good point. I need to revisit that then. Again, that's my ignorance of the sport. I wasn't aware that we had things like packing courses.
I think Eric sort of touched on it when he said there are other people at the drop zone.
Yeah, I wasn't being specific.
Who come into contact with under 18s.
If you come into contact with under 18s in that context, in a teaching, training, or education environment, you need an enhanced DBS check. Okay. So that flow chart, this one. So is the role working with? Yeah, yes, it is. So in my head, because I come from a coaching background, I've got coaches in my head. Yeah. So I know, we've got instructors as well, they fall under it. So yeah, anything of we're running a rigging course, or we're running a packing course, or any education, you fall under the legislation. So you need a DBS.
I think in my case it doesn't actually apply.
Well, why do you ask the question? Well, one thing I have got to mention, and I apologise, unlike other national governing bodies, we are accepting DBS certificates from other organisations. So when I was at hockey, for example, and boxing, they would insist that only our DBS certificates are valid. And in bearing in mind that in the sporting background, my background, half the coaches at my hockey club are teachers. They've all got DBSs but England Hockey said, well, no, we're not accepting those. You need and the reason they do that is because they get 10 quid every time you apply for it. Right. We've decided not to do that. So if you're a teacher, if you're a member of the armed forces, if you've got a DBS from another employment, and it's within 3 years, we'll accept that. So if you're working, I keep mentioning Langer because it's the one I've been to most. If you're working at Langer and you say, I'm a teacher, there's my DBS, fine. We'll take that. You don't have to go through the rigmarole of applying again because it's 30 odd quid to apply. Any more for any more? I'm around all day. I'm here in the evening. You've all got my phone number, my direct phone number. If there's any questions that you think of afterwards, please just grab me. More than willing to have a chat. Buy me a beer this evening. I'll have a very long chat. Okay, everybody around? All done?
Thank you.
Thank you all very
Thank
much.
you.